Now, firstly, I want to thank all of the parties who've worked together on this cross-party motion, and I especially want to thank the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign and the activists in it who've been working for months to highlight the issue and draw attention to the issue that there's Israeli bonds being sold in Europe, and that's been facilitated by the Irish Central Bank. They've done excellent work on this. Cathaoirleach, Dr. Ali Al-Najjar works in Sligo. A few weeks ago, 9 of his nieces and nephews were killed by Israel. An airstrike on the home of his sister, a doctor in Gaza, killed her children while she was working in the emergency ward. Yaha, Rakan, Ruslan, Jubran, Eve, Rivan, Saidin, Lukman and Cedar were all killed in the attack. The children were aged between 6 months and 12 years, and several were still in their pyjamas at the time of the attack. The children's father, who was with them at the time, has since died from injuries that he sustained in the attack. He was also a doctor. Now, we don't know if the munitions used in the attack were, in this brutal attack, passed through Irish airspace in their way. But what we do know with respect to these munitions is that they were part financed by the sale of Israeli bonds. And we know in Europe those bonds are being sold with the facilitation of the Irish Central Bank. We also know that the Irish government, we've been asking them to do something about this, are not willing to do anything about this. So let's be clear about this. Genocide is taking place and it's been part funded by the sale of Israeli bonds, including in Europe, which has been facilitated by the Irish Central Bank. This motion seeks to end this, and in order for it to succeed, we need the support of TDs across the Dáil on this. Cathaoirleach, what's happening in Gaza is absolutely and utterly horrific. I know that every TD in the Dáil has that view. Men, women and children are being starved to death. Food and aid has been blocked at the border by Israel. When tiny amounts of aid is being distributed and made available, people have been killed trying to access it. This is absolutely and utterly brutal. Mothers have been forced to try and boil grass to feed their children, and starvation is being used as a weapon of war against innocent people. The Governor of the Central Bank says that the Central Bank cannot act on this, that's beyond their competency to decide whether or not genocide is taking place. However, the facts are that in January 2024, the International Court of Justice confirmed the plausibility of the charges of genocide taken against Israel, in this case taken by South Africa. The Irish government in recent weeks has recognised that what's happening in Gaza is genocide and has been clear about that. And I say to the government, it is not simply enough to say that what is happening is genocide. You must act under the terms of the Genocide Convention. You must do everything you can to stop and prevent genocide in Gaza. Let's be very clear about this. The Israeli government is selling these bonds to help finance the genocide. And it's the Irish Central Bank that is facilitating the sale of those bonds in Europe. So there's a direct link between these bonds and the genocide that is taking place, and this has to stop. As a signatory of the Genocide Convention, the Irish Government and indeed our public institutions, which includes the Central Bank, have a legal obligation to do everything they can to stop genocide. Not only has Ireland and other countries failed to put meaningful sanctions in place against Israel, Ireland, in fact, is Israel's second largest trading partner in the world. The Irish government, by not backing this motion, are missing an opportunity to take meaningful action against Israel. These are bonds that are being explicitly marketed as being crucial to the war effort by Israel. Israel has run a marketing campaign imploring people to buy these bonds so they can stand with Israel. Over €3.34 billion has been raised through the sale of Israeli bonds since October 2023. One of the websites used to promote the sale of these bonds includes phrases such as "Israel is at war" and a quote from the Israeli President Isaac Herzog emphasising the crucial role of Israeli bonds during this time of conflict. Israeli bonds President and CEO Danny Navev has told potential investors that purchasing the bonds is the best way to help Israel support their war campaign. So this is unequivocally clear. Recently, Cathaoirleach the Taoiseach Simon Harris said that children are being left starving and even dying as we speak. He went on to say, we cannot and will not stand idly by and let this happen. Now, I know the Taoiseach when he says this, and when government ministers and TDs say this, I know they mean these words when they say them. I know that. However, allowing the continued sale of Israeli bonds in Europe and allowing the continued facilitation by the Irish Central Bank is standing idly by in this instance. It is standing idly by. Allowing munitions destined for Israel through Irish airspace that are literally being used, dropped on children, men and women in Gaza, that is standing idly by. Voting against legislation to stop Israel, the facilitation of the sale of these bonds, that is standing idly by. If you don't like the legislation that was presented 2 weeks ago, pass this motion and enact your own emergency legislation as the motion is asking you to do. There are no excuses, Cathaoirleach, not to act. There's legal advice from the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisor, concluding that we can provide restricted access to financial services based on public policy grounds, rooted in Ireland's pursuit of its international obligations. And it's clear that this can be done in accordance with the Irish Constitution, European law and international law. There's legal advice from the Attorney General that states that the state can invoke justification grounded on public policy based on the need to respect international law and the rights of those adversely affected, the Palestinian people. The government have told us that that legal advice has been given by the Attorney General. So I would implore every TD in this Dáil, there should be a free vote this evening on this. Every TD should be allowed to vote with their conscience, and we should send a very clear signal as a Dáil that not only are we united in terms of standing against this genocide, but we're also united as a Dáil in wanting the central bank to stop facilitating these bonds, to stop the financing of this genocide that is happening in part through the facilitation of the sale of these bonds. Gurv Margaret.
Thank you.
I was sitting right in this chair a couple of weeks ago when the Taoiseach said the word. I had to take a double take to see if I heard correctly. The Taoiseach said, let's call a spade a spade. What's happening in Gaza is genocide. That was an important moment. After 19 months of evasion and of illegal gymnastics, the Taoiseach finally said it. He stood in the chamber and admitted what the world has seen in real time since October 2023, that the government of Israel, under Benjamin Netanyahu, is committing genocide in Gaza. And what did he do with that truth? He used it as a soundbite while voting down a bill that would have stopped Ireland facilitating that very genocide through the sale of Israeli war bonds. That is not just moral cowardice, it's complicity with eyes wide open. The Taoiseach said yesterday in this chamber to my colleague Deputy Gibney that she was using the word complicity cheaply. Let's go into that a bit. The bonds that are advertised openly and shamelessly as a way to support Israel's war effort, they are not ambiguous instruments. The prospectus spells it out. The advertising says the quiet part very loudly. Stand with Israel. Israel is at war. These bonds bankroll the bombs, the starvation, the extermination. And Ireland is signing off on them through our central bank. The Taoiseach's position, now backed by the Taoiseach and presumably by yourself, Minister, is that genocide is happening, but Ireland must do nothing that might affect their GDP, that might affect their relationships with the US. And this is what this comes down to. Palestinian lives being weighed against bond markets and bilateral trade flows. Genocide reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet, but genocide is not a technical issue. To use the word genocide in our parliament is not just a throwaway word. It has meaning. It has to. We're told that the central bank is independent, that it just signs off on paperwork. But the central bank does not operate in a moral vacuum. This is not a technical question. This is a test of whether Ireland honours its legal obligations under the Genocide Convention. Obligations we took on not as a favour to anyone, because we believe that there must be no lines that states can cross without consequence, because we believe that never again should mean exactly that. So let's call it what it is: a calculated dereliction of duty cloaked in humanitarian rhetoric. This government condemns the killings in Gaza while actively enabling the financing of it. It mounts concerns about the enforced famine while doing nothing about the cargo planes flying out of Shannon Airport. It recognises the state of Palestine while killing off every piece of legislation that might make a difference. The Occupied Territories Bill, delayed, and then watered down. The Restrictions Measures Bill, gone. This motion today, the one 2 weeks ago, any motion that parties across the chamber have brought forward, we're almost told that we're being naive. The Taoiseach says he wants to call a spade when he used the phrase genocide. So let's do that. What's happening in Gaza is genocide. What's happening in this chamber is, by virtue of the fact that we're refusing to meet our obligations under the Prevention of Genocide, is collusion. And what the Taoiseach has done is speak the truth only in order to bury it. And when did he come to believe that this was genocide? Was it before or after the ICJ's ruling? Was it before or after the arrest warrant was sought by the ICC? Did he have to see the piles of bodies and starving children for himself? Was it when every journalist in Gaza is targeted, every educational institution obliterated? Was it when we sat here and debated whether they would actually bomb a hospital and then realised that they are bombing every hospital? Genocide doesn't happen in the shadows. It thrives when others look away. It spreads through delay, distraction and diplomacy that always stops just short of doing the one thing that might actually matter, and that is to refuse to play a part in it. This is not about any attempt at virtue signalling. Nobody at all believes that anybody has a monopoly on compassion. But we do believe that we can do more. So this is about whether we stand by international law when it is hard. Whether we believe that genocide is wrong even when it's being carried out by an ally of our ally. Whether we are willing to accept the political or financial costs to stop being part of the machine. The government talks a lot about being on the right side of history. But history is being written right now. But the people of this country are failing, Europe is failing, the US is failing, but the children starving under blockade, but the silence of those who knew and did nothing. It is not being written by any journalist, because journalists are not allowed into Gaza precisely because they don't want to see the truth of the horrors that are being inflicted there. We've said the word, now we need to act like it means something. And this counter motion that you brought forward today, Minister, this does not speak to a government that is willing to live up to every obligation that we have. It is just another form of phraseology as a way of avoiding our responsibility. I mean, in your own counter motion, you say this, and it's really well worded. The Genocide Convention requires states to undertake, to prevent and to punish genocide. So am I to believe that the Taoiseach, the leader of our country, has stood there and said the word genocide, and then we just equivocate? We say, well, actually, you know what, this is a technical issue. We're not obliged. The central bank is independent. No, we have moral authority in this. There has been no diktat given to the central bank to challenge, question, are we sure that these bonds and terms of prospectuses are in keeping with our obligations under the Prevention of Genocide Act? Because if we're not, why aren't we speaking out? The counter motion also goes to talk about all the things that the government has done. And I think we all accept, it's regularly referred to across the chamber, that the Irish state has gone further than most. But precisely because the bar has been so low. I mean, the review, you emphasise the importance of the review by the EU of Israel's compliance with its obligations under Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Brilliant. I was in the chamber, was it 17 months ago, when my own party leader, Holly Cairns, first brought that to the chamber. We know that the government have gone further than most, but we also know that at times it's being done kicking and fighting, scrapping there. I mean, it was your own former party leader, Leo Varadkar, who actually wrote to Ursula von der Leyen asking, were Israel in breach of the EU trade agreement? And what happened? Nothing. No response. but the own EPP, but which your party is a member of and proudly speaks to being a member of, who you went out and advocated for after the European elections to resume the position that she's now in, despite the fact they didn't even acknowledge a letter from our own Taoiseach, your party leader, asking was the Israel in breach of that very covenant. I mean, this is extraordinary. We can do more.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Week after week after week, we come into this chamber and we talk about the most recent, the newest act of depravity that we see rain down on the people of Gaza by Israel. Week after week for 20 months. We talk in this chamber about children who have been shot in the head, shot in the chest by snipers. Children who have had to battle their way out of fires while their siblings and their parents burned behind them. Children whose parents write their names on their bodies because the parents are really conscious that if the family is wiped out, they want their child to know their family name, that it will live on with that child. It's absolutely horrific. And I think every time we talk about it in this chamber, we think it can't get much worse. Israel can't go any lower. And yet they do. They do, Minister. And I know everyone in this chamber feels this. I know everyone in this chamber is horrified by what's happening in Israel, or in Gaza. I know everyone in this chamber knows that we have a major responsibility here to deal with it and to try to stop it. And I know we all know what our constituents feel about it. We all know what our family, what our friends feel about it. And I know that we all, however misguided that feeling is, I know everyone in this chamber thinks that we're doing everything that we can. But we're simply not, Minister. We're simply not. Today's motion is actually a relatively small action to stop the central bank signing off or approving bonds that are being awarded in the face of a genocide that's been recognised by the head, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach in this chamber. But what we would hope is that that small action, that sense of bravery from the Irish people would lead to other countries doing similar. And that at some stage we will get the momentum that there is a level of accountability for Israel, accountability that we have not seen to date. That Israel recognise that people and countries are going to stand up and say, we see you, we see exactly who you are, we see what you're doing, and we're not going to stand by and allow it to continue. That we will do everything in our power to uphold international law. Because, Minister, if we don't have international law, what do we have? Where's the safety for anyone? I want to ask you one thing today, Minister, and that is that you will ensure that all government TDs have a free vote on this issue. All those backbenchers that support you in the decisions that yourself and your cabinet colleagues make on a weekly basis. That those backbenchers are given the opportunity to reflect their conscience in this vote. They're given the opportunity to reflect what their constituents want them to do, what their family, what their friends want them to do. And that they're given the same opportunity that the independent members of your government have been given. Because I don't think it's fair, Minister, that any backbencher would have to vote against this motion, a relatively simple motion that gives the government control in how it manages it, but that they would have to vote against this motion when other independents who swore they were going to support your government through the good and the bad, that actually they can listen to their constituents and represent their constituents and know that they did what they could in the face of this genocide. Minister, the Irish public deeply, deeply want us to take action. They have seen this go on for far too long. They're starting to take things into their own hands. We have a number of Irish citizens who will be marching to Gaza in the next number of weeks. People feel very strongly about us, and they want us and they want you to do more. The Palestinian people, they need us to take action. They cannot withstand this any longer. And Minister, I will say that the future demands that we take action. That when we look back and see what our role was, where we stood on this, that we can stand proud, that we know that we reflected the views of the Irish people, and we did what was right in the face of these horrors, that we stood by international law and the people of Gaza. Thank you.
I now call on the Minister to move the Government's amendment.
Thank you very much, Ceann Corda. And I want to begin by recognising the genuine intent that is behind this motion, and by pointing out again that there is far more there are far more issues that we agree on than we disagree on when it comes to our response back to the horror of what is happening in Gaza. I'm not going to make charges of naivety to anybody in the Social Democrats who are proposing this motion. I am moved, like you are, by the appalling scenes that we see every day on our phones and television. But I ask you, if I refrain from making the charge of naivety against you, and you accept my compassion and my reaction to the awful scenes that we see every day as being genuine, then you refrain from making charges regarding complicity or collaboration in what I acknowledge to be an appalling tragedy that is unfolding on the people of the middle of Gaza. There have been many references to international law, all of which I agree with in the opening statements. And what I have to do, in addition to the human feelings that I have and the determination of the Government of Ireland to respond back to this, is recognise the law that is there. The law that is there with regard to the European Union. The law that is there that recognises the independent operation of the Central Bank of Ireland. And I have to be cognizant of that in decisions that I make and in my reaction back, such as motions that are being proposed by our colleagues in the Social Democrats and the motion that came forward and the legislation that came forward from Sinn Féin. So in opening my response back to the motion this morning, let me outline again my utter condemnation for what is befalling the people of Gaza. Let me make reference to what is contained within the counter motion, which is not just the words of the government, which I accept are being recognised here today, but more importantly, the actions of the government in responding back to the appalling suffering. And the motion lays out the financial support that has been made available to the people of Palestine, our support for organisations such as UNRWA, the work of the United Nations, but also lays out very clearly the work that Ireland is involved in at a diplomatic level, between countries and then within international organisations, to put in place a call and our efforts to ensure that Israel complies with international law, stressing the importance of international law when it comes to the suffering of the most vulnerable. And Israel to date has ignored these calls, but only has to strengthen the commitment and work of the government to ensure that within international law more is done. And the government is working relentlessly with partners and with others to effect the type of change that Israel may not be able to ignore. And it is vital work, and our efforts are making a difference, but I accept they need to deliver more. We are approaching the tragedy that is unfolding in Gaza with principled conviction, but also a recognition of the realities that we face, that we have to build up a diplomatic coalition to achieve more, and we also have to be conscious of laws that are already in place, which is why we are moving the counter motion today. So with regard to laws that are in place and the work that the government is doing, we have used our diplomatic role, we have used our voice when we filed a declaration of intervention in the case taken by South Africa against Israel at the International Court of Justice last January. Our declaration was based on careful and detailed legal analysis that was aimed at supporting the strictest interpretation of the Genocide Convention, promoting the maximum level of protection possible for citizens. And we have also been unequivocal in calling for the full implementation of the binding preliminary measures that were issued by the ICJ in South Africa's case against Israel under the Convention. And the reason why I emphasise this to the House today is this is the work that we are doing. This is the diplomatic action that we are taking. This is voice, but it is the use of a voice to make a difference, and it is accompanied by the other measures that we have put in place, particularly our efforts with regard to a two-state solution, and the work that we will be doing in the forthcoming UN high-level conference on implementing the two-state solution in New York this June. And we are very hopeful, and we will be using this meeting to make the case for what could be a very important moment for the international community. And Cahir, that work is yielding results. We welcome the announcement of the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union to review the association agreement with Israel. This is a crucial step that Ireland and Spain first called for in February for last year, and a clear majority of member states have now sent a strong signal about the need for Israel to change, to halt the military operations and to lift the blockade on life-saving aid. And it is essential that we continue our diplomatic efforts to deliver this. Which then leads on to the detail of the motion that is in front of us here today. The central bank is an independent, apolitical financial regulator. It is a cornerstone of our financial policy. And during some discussions in this House, the role of the central bank in relation to Israeli bonds has been mischaracterised. I want to again set the record straight to ensure its role is clearly understood. The central bank does not issue, sell, trade, list, or oversee Israeli bonds. Its role under EU legislation is to assess a prospectus to ensure that it includes all of the requirements of the law in that area. It does not endorse the issuer or the securities by way of approval, and neither the issuer, in this case the State of Israel, nor the product becomes regulated or endorsed as a result of this assessment. So specifically, the motion calls on the government to undermine the independence of the central bank and does not make clear and gives a wrong interpretation of the role of the central bank in carrying out its function as required under EU law. The motion calls on the government to immediately implement legislation that I believe would be unworkable. And as I've outlined in the House before, the government has been advised that previous calls to permit the central bank to disregard EU financial services legislation wouldn't be consistent with EU law, would undermine our obligations in EU member states, and would be open to legal challenge. In addition to that, an action like that is not consistent with the efforts that we have made to build up a consensus by working with other countries together. It's by continuing to build up a group of countries within the EU and globally that in Ireland, an island of our size and scale, has the opportunity to make such a difference to a tragedy that we are all united in condemning. The advice that I have referred to has been received by our Attorney General, and let me be clear that what I am called upon to do in this motion, similar to the proposal that was put forward by Sinn Féin last week, would be unworkable, would contravene EU law, and would not achieve its intended objective. So what I want to conclude by contending here today is the importance of distinguishing between what I accept to be an absolutely well-intentioned and thoughtful proposal of an action that I believe we would not be able to implement in the way the opposition are calling for, and the concrete actions the government is taking. And that is why the government will move a motion today which calls out the appalling situation the Palestinian people are facing, but highlights the work that we are doing, will continue to do, to make a difference and effect real change. The recognition by others of Ireland's position as an independent state eventually led to the establishment of a peaceful nation over a century ago. We believe that our recognition of Palestinian statehood will contribute to peace and to reconciliation ultimately, but there's obviously a long journey ahead. The people of Gaza deserve peace, a peace that honours their legitimate aspirations to live with respect, justice, security and dignity, free from violence and the threat of violence, expectations that are obviously grievously being harmed and not delivered today. And that is why we will work tirelessly with them to help achieve a peace, but respectfully contend that the motion that has been proposed today would not play a role in making that happen.
Thank you. Deputy Gibney.
Gurmagad Cahirlock. Minister, I first would like to address, as did my colleague Deputy Gannon, the reaction to my use of the word complicit yesterday in the Chamber, and the Taoiseach who took very strong reaction to it. But I want to be clear about why I'm using this word. And may I first say that a better word maybe to describe the central bank and its role is involvement, if that makes it easier for people to understand it. The central bank is involved in the sale of Israeli bonds in Europe by approving the prospectus. That is a fact. It's indisputable. And the reason that the word complicit applies is because by facilitating that, complicity is not just through action, it's also through inaction. And by facilitating the sale of those Israeli bonds, and by the government's inaction to stop the central bank from facilitating the sale of Israeli bonds, all Irish people are made complicit in the actions of Israel. That is what we're saying when we say complicity. That is why we are inundated with emails, and you are inundated with emails, why all of our constituents are reaching out to us, absolutely heartbroken, begging for something to be done. It is why people are turning up on the streets again and again and again. We're not asking you to fix this all on your own. We just want you to try. And I would like to speak to some of the counter-motion and some of the rebuttal that you have put forward today. And I want to start by quoting from the Central Bank's own Code of Conduct, which I have done before in this chamber, because they say that acting with integrity requires a higher standard of behaviour than simply achieving a basic level of compliance with applicable laws and regulations. So when you say, Minister, that you don't believe that this would be workable, that you would believe that you would be undermining independence, I'm not at any point taking for granted that there is not a complex set of laws and financial regulations that dominate the activities of the central bank. None of us are. We understand the complexity of this picture. But the Genocide Convention is clear. In January 2024, the International Court of Justice found that the Palestinian people in Gaza had plausible rights to be protected from the imminent risk of genocide, and that there is an immediate legal obligation to take maximum action to prevent genocide. So believing that something is not workable is not reason enough to fail to act. We have to try. And if that means testing it in the courts, then we have to try. If we as a state have to muddle through the complexity of this first step, that is what we have to do, because it will set off a domino effect for country after country after country. The government must go further to end the Israeli prospectus and, if necessary, fight it in the courts. The same ruling says that they, and what it means is all UN member states, are also under an obligation not to render aid or assistance in maintaining the situation created by Israel's illegal presence in the occupied Palestinian territory. So again, it gives that force, that legal force, to allow us to do it. And I also want to draw your attention to the central bank's own FAQ on bonds, because the central bank, as we've heard, can only refuse the approval of a prospectus where the central bank has a legal basis to do so. Other than sufficient prospectus disclosures, an example of a legal basis for refusal would be 1. The existence of EU financial sanctions prohibiting the provision of services or assistance in connection with the issuance of securities by the Israeli government, or number 2, national restrictive measures to the same effect. That's what the Sinn Féin bill tried to introduce a couple of weeks ago. That's what we're trying to do now. Because in your counter-motion today, you say that the central bank has clearly stated that an advisory opinion of the ICJ, or indeed the processes of the ICC, does not constitute grounds for the central bank to refuse the prospectus. But what it fails to say is that the central bank has said that an example of a legal basis for refusal would be that number 2 that I just listed, national restrictive measures to prohibit the selling of securities with Israel. These are some of the ways in which I think your counter-motion is incredibly weak. And as my other colleagues have done, I urge the government to facilitate a free vote on this. We in Ireland, we feel powerless. I feel powerless. I feel heartbroken. And the people of Ireland are telling me that they feel powerless. We have seen incredible leadership from the 12 individuals on the Madeleine, from Trinity College divesting itself as the first third-level institution to do so from Israeli institutions, from the people who are joining right now a caravan to march on Gaza, and from the Hague Group, who have just now called for an international conference to end this genocide. We need to see that same leadership from this government to push through and make sure that the sale of Israeli bonds is stopped in Europe and it facilitates the end of this genocide.
Thanks, Cahir. Look, Minister, as children's spokesperson for the Social Democrats, I'm going to begin with bearing in mind the 50,000 children and young people who have been killed or injured in this genocide since 2023. And to quote UNICEF, the children of Gaza need protection, they need food, water, medicine. They need a ceasefire, but more than anything, they need immediate, collective action to stop this once and for all. 1.7 million children are in need of humanitarian assistance. Rates of malnutrition continue to rise amongst the children of Gaza. James Elder this week on RTE from Gaza said there's no exaggeration. Every single child in this place needs mental health support. It's night after night bombardment. There's not a child here who doesn't know someone who's been killed, who hasn't seen the most ghastly wounds. 95% of school buildings in Gaza have been damaged. Yesterday, our Taoiseach Simon Harris said anything that can be done to make sure the eyes of the world are fixed on Gaza at a time when the international community is failing to do enough for Gaza and for the children of Gaza is a good and appropriate thing. Anything that can be done. Here you go. But on the same day our Taoiseach said this, the government tabled an amendment to this motion that completely contradicts the anything that can be done call to action. The Social Democrats' motion asks you to advise the central bank that it is acting in violation of the Genocide Convention by facilitating the sale of bonds. Your amendment condemns the renewed Israeli offensive. The Social Democrats' motion tells the central bank that by acting as the enabling cog in the fundraising machine, it's putting the state at risk of a charge of complicity in genocide. The government's amendment urges all parties to return to talks. The Social Democrats' motion insists that the central bank immediately ends its facilitation of the sale of Israeli bonds. The government amendment tells us that it will progress legislation prohibiting goods from settlements, not services. A much weakened occupied territories bill that is not what you told the electorate you would do. The Social Democrats' motion asks this government to enact emergency legislation to explicitly force the central bank to stop facilitating the sale of these bonds. And Minister, the amendment says that the government has received advice from the Attorney-General that such legislation would not be compatible with our EU obligations. Minister, in the interest of transparency, I'm appealing to you, publish that advice. Show us what the legal impediment here is to progress this. You could allow, and like my colleagues here, I appeal to you to allow a vote of conscience on this. I think we all know what would happen tonight. TDs from across this House would support it. Why? It is the right thing to do. It supports the Taoiseach's anything that can be done call to action. The Social Democrats' motion, Minister Cathaoirleach, calls for action. The government amendment simply offers more words. And I want to be clear, Minister, I am very proud to be associated with the words that you and your colleagues in Cabinet and in leadership have shown and said in recent months. But I want to be associated with a national parliament that can say it has done everything in its power to do right by the children and the people of Gaza and Palestine.
Deputy Doherty.
I stand to support the amendment and commend the Social Democrat Party for using their time and bringing forward this amendment. This motion is in line with the debate we had last week in relation to our legislation that would stop the central bank facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds in Ireland, and indeed it would have an immediate effect in relation to the sale in Europe also. And Minister, I said yesterday at the last debate that your response was shameful, and I believe that your response is shameful again. And I think history will show that you're on the wrong side of this issue. You have danced around the issue. You've used words. You've told us what the central bank is not doing. You've used carefully constructed words to tell us what we can't do. But the reality is, if government wants to initiate national measures that will ensure that the central bank do not sign off on a perspective and therefore not facilitate the sales of these war bonds in Ireland, then they can do so. That's the reality of it. And that's the start and the finish of this issue. If there is a political will, then this can be stopped. You talked about central bank aren't selling, central bank aren't doing this or doing that. What the central bank are doing, Minister, is they are facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds in the face of genocide. We've heard from my colleagues here on the right, to my right, in relation to what is happening in Palestine. I don't need to repeat it. We are all appalled about it. It isn't a question of how appalled we are. It is a question of we have a position of authority and power and we can do something about it. The facilitation is actually what is written in the law, in the legislation. That is what the central bank are doing. Can it be stopped? Of course it can be stopped. The Cabinet just approved to do heads of bill in relation to the Occupied Territories Bill. They will use a public policy exemption to actually be able to enact that in law here in Ireland. That public policy exemption on the free movement of goods is important. What we have argued for is the same public policy exemption on the free movement of capital. And why is the free movement of capital an easier one to get? Because the free movement of goods is an exclusive EU competence, where the free movement of capital is only a shared competence. Indeed, Article 63 allows for an exemption under it, and that is why it has happened in other European member states in relation to capital restrictions, because it is there, but it has to be measured against 4 principles that have been carried out and tested in the European Court of Justice, and that is what the legislation would do. And see, if you have issue with the way that we frame the legislation, that's fine. Draft your own. Stop the sale of Israeli war bonds in Ireland. Stop the central bank from facilitating them. And you're the person, above anybody else in this House, above anybody else in this country, you're the person tasked as Minister for Finance that can bring this this legislation through, and that's why I say, Minister, unfortunately, you are on the wrong side of history. Genocide is staring us in the face. It is happening in real time, and you are complicit because the central bank is facilitating it. And anybody, above anybody else, you're the guy who can stop this by supporting this motion and enacting the necessary legislation.
Minister, what is happening in Gaza at this moment in time, it is undoubtedly a genocide, and I welcome it. It is the fact that the government is now using that language. So that is your position. That is the position of your government as articulated by the Minister for Foreign Affairs. And it's important to remember that. You know, we are looking at scenes, and I can't remember anything in my lifetime, the scenes that we're looking at. Children being left without families, children being killed in their tens of thousands, people starving while the Gaza Strip is surrounded by aid that wants to get in, and they are being deprived of it. The most appalling war crimes. Again, language that you have used. And I don't doubt that you find these things appalling. I don't suggest that for 1 second. But the point of realising that is, are we using all the levers that we can? Are we taking all the actions that we can? And, you know, what is not in dispute here, at least as I understand it, what is not in dispute is that these bonds are being facilitated by the central bank. What is not in dispute is that Israel is openly advertising the sale of these bonds as funding what they call a war effort, and in our view is the arms and the munitions and everything that goes towards the genocide that is happening. That is not in dispute. Now, you have used technical arguments, and to be honest, I am sceptical, and on the basis of the OPLA and what Deputy Doherty has outlined and the Attorney-General has outlined, and very often, I think, when politics dictates it, legal grounds can shift, and we saw that recently with the rent pressure zones. But I would say this, if you insist on technical grounds, what I haven't heard you said, Minister, is if it's desirable. I haven't heard you say that if you could do it, that you would do it. I want to hear that from you, because if you can do it technically, then you should do it. But I suspect, unfortunately, that you've concluded that politically you can't or you won't, and in that you are absolutely wrong.
The Irish Government must move to stop the flow of blood money from Ireland to Israel. Minister, you tell us why it can't be done. But you directly contradict the legal advice that we in opposition received from the Oireachtas' own legal advisors. When Sinn Féin brought a bill to end Ireland's complicity with genocide, it was backed with sound legal advice that clearly stated that the bill was compliant with Irish law, European law and international law. Ireland is fully entitled under EU law to unilaterally restrict access to our financial services. And not just entitled, but when it comes to the sale of war bonds that goes towards bombs and bullets that are taking Palestinian lives, the genocide, I believe that we have no choice in the matter. The central bank has given us permission for these bonds, has given permission for these bonds to be sold through Ireland. The government is authorised to advise them that this should not be permitted. You've took that decision not to give that advice. Stopping the sale of these bonds is a concrete, tangible action that Ireland can take in the stand against genocide. You say in your speech, Minister, Ireland's persistent advocacy on behalf of the people of Gaza at EU level is yielding tangible results. Are you for real? Do you not see what's happening? Gaza is flattened to the ground. People are starving, and you're saying in your speech that it's your approach is yielding tangible results. Minister, Israel is conducting a campaign that began as collective punishment and has moved now to ethnic cleansing. Ireland cannot be a conduit for blood money. We know what the bonds are going towards. We have the legal authority to do something. It's time for us to act, time for us to stand up and say no.
I want to commend the Soc Dems for bringing forward this really important motion, and we have the Central Bank before the Finance Committee today to explain their position on why there has been no action in relation to these bonds. So I think this motion is surely timely. The Central Bank have thus far refused to reject the prospectuses submitted in relation to these Israeli war bonds. Their reasons not to act have been somewhat of a movable feast. Previously, the Governor of the Central Bank told us that these were not war bonds and were instead being used for general financing purposes. Then, thanks to reporting by The Ditch, we learned potential investors were being informed that the best way to support Israel's war effort was actually to buy these bonds. Now, the Central Bank's contention is that it has only two grounds to refuse the prospectus. These are the imposition of EU sanctions and, number two, what they refer to as national restrictive measures. Now, if a state is a signatory to the Genocide Convention, which is codified in Irish law per the 1973 Act, which makes complicity in genocide an offence, does that not constitute a national restrictive measure? And if it doesn't, then I don't know what actually does, Minister. The Central Bank and the government are using these arguments and really and truthfully, and I think my colleague Sean Crowe really put it there, like, if we don't act now, when are we ever going to act? And it's the exact same tactic as we've seen with the Occupied Territories Bill. And again, we've seen from leaked correspondence that it said that this isn't a legal drafting issue of legislation, but that it is a political choice. We can't have political choices that don't enable us to do every single thing that we can to support the people of Gaza and to stop this genocide happening. We need to do everything. And if it is a case that these bonds are, that are being facilitated are financing the war, as has been said by them themselves, well, then we shouldn't be in any way dealing with them in any way, shape or form. So, Minister, this is the second time that this has come before the House. Obviously, this is going to be discussed at the Finance Committee as well today. We need to see action on it because we can't continue the way it's been going.
Minister, there is genocide taking place in Gaza. There is widespread ethnic cleansing happening across Palestine. Israel is an apartheid state. Almost every week, weapons are being transported through Ireland to Israel. And these weapons are being used to continue that genocide, the ethnic cleansing, and to uphold that brutal system of apartheid. There is absolutely no denying this. And while there is no absence of talk and spin from you and your government supporters, there is a complete absence of action. Actually, there is some action from this government on what is happening in Palestine. Action in actively blocking measures brought forward before the Dáil that would put pressure on the apartheid state of Israel, such as enacting the Occupied Territories Bill and the Illegal Israel Settlements Divestment Bill. And only last week voting to support the continued sale of Israel bonds by the Irish Central Bank. Minister, it is only when the Israel pockets are hit that we see any change, because all the words of condemnation clearly don't matter a damn. So let's be frank and straight about this. The overwhelming majority of people here in Ireland want to see a stand taken against Israel and their war crimes in Palestine. But the Irish government and the EU have taken a position to provide quiet and stubble support to Israel. And this is clear from your actions here in the Dáil. Minister, outside the offices of TDs in Carlow and Kilkenny, there are protests, calling them out on voting for bonds over babies. All TDs should have a free vote. If not, they will have to live with the screams they ignore, because it will haunt them every day.
Okay, here, look. I'd like to acknowledge and commend the Irish Government for joining the case before the International Court of Justice against Israel taken under the Genocide Convention. So too, I commend the funding Government have provided to the UNRWA for the humanitarian aid and recognition of the State of Palestine. But there is where the commendations cease, because this government have failed to implement a single solidarity economic sanction against the genocidal Israel regime. Despite the Taoiseach committing to the occupied terrorist in advance of the election, he now differentiates between goods and services to water down its impact. The International Court of Justice did not differentiate in trade of goods and services in its ruling on the consequences of Israel's opposition, nor did the Taoiseach's government when it co-sponsored a resolution on the outgoings of that judgment of the United Nations General Assembly. But he differentiates today. He claims it's a necessity, despite his own Attorney General having advised that it is a political decision. Now Israel maintain that Sinn Féin's bill to ban the sale of Israeli bonds is also illegal under EU law. Claims absolutely rubbished by the legal opinion of the Oireachtas Independent Office of Parliamentary Legal Advisers. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have shielded Israel's economy from legally correct sanction for their genocide for far too long. The sale of Israeli bonds in Ireland must be banned now. And shame be upon you, willing to provide economic cover for Israel's genocide, for fear of a morally bankrupt European Commission President that you put in office.
Well, my voice is hurt the Lanig Oireachtas and Runcho Chor agus Takim Gehillis go Homlan Live. 2 weeks ago, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael clubbed together to vote down the Sinn Féin's bill to stop our central bank facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds. And what are those war bonds funded since that decision? Well, the Israeli state killed 70 Palestinians on the 29th, 72 on the 30th, 54 on the 1st of June, 27 on the 3rd, nearly 100 on the 4th, 52 on the 5th, 42 on Eid on the 6th, 70 on the 7th, 47 on the 8th, 27 on the 9th, 36 on the 10th. In fact, in under 2 years, those war bonds have funded the killing of 65,000 Palestinians. This is the exact toll that is being wrought upon the Palestinian peoples in a genocide, and yet your government is facilitating that. Crucially, to 1 day after the vote 2 weeks ago, Israeli forces also shot at brave Irish peacekeepers. That could not be more serious or more grave. The Irish government voted to facilitate the funding of attacks on Irish soldiers because you voted to fund their war efforts. In the Constitution, Article 39 states, assisting another state to levy war against this state is defined quite clearly as nothing less than treason. Are you happy to assist the funding of a state that shoots at Irish soldiers? That's what you're doing if you vote against this motion. And Wilship Sásta, Lanúnt leis ligin de Bonnie Coga Israel a bheith díaltans an tír seo, ag ligin dóibh tilla bumí Pillair agus Dúrlachán a Chanacht, agus a úsáid ag gine páistí agus pobl nabhór cóidach Palestínach in Gaza. So there here how shifts of ragoid cashin is staying in enough to make impi or votal lesson rule.
It's only a fortnight since Sinn Féin brought forward the Israeli Genocide Bonds Bill. In that vote, the government squandered an opportunity to stand on the right side of what will no doubt be remembered as a decisive moment in history. I want to thank the Social Democrats for returning to this issue and giving the government a second chance to make good on its supposed commitment to the Palestinian people. Because for all the government's backpatting and boasts about being the best in class on Palestine, the truth is we're now trailing behind Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Norway, countries that have already moved to sanction Israeli leaders for their abominable human rights abuses. So let's be honest here, the motion before us today is modest. It is not a big ask. We are not trying to ban the sale of Israeli genocide bonds across Europe. We don't have the power to do that. But what we do have the power to say that we, the Irish people, want no hand, act or part in that ugly deed. We know for a fact that we have the power to do this, and suggestion to the contrary is nothing more than foot-dragging and cowardice. Mahachi and unrealtish len rún seo, tá deis ag muintir na héireann teachracht a thuairt an stáitse idirnáisiúnta go bhfuil muid aontaithe in aig an cinenne dhíthú in Gaza, gur féidir seasamh sús in aig bulathe. Nach dog for neamhord dhéanacht muintir na Palestina. The Genocide Bonds Bill is about sending a powerful message to our people and to the international community that we will not stand idly by, that we can and will stand up to bullies. that basic human decency and dignity still count for something. I implore the government lead with their conscience and wipe our hands clean of these bloody bonds once and for all.
Minister, it's hard to believe that we are actually having this debate. I think there's absolute acceptance that Israel is an apartheid state that is engaged in genocidal action in Gaza at this point in time. We saw another 25 killed at the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation aid station. Now, I don't know what defence there can be in relation to what Israel is doing on a day-by-day basis. We are talking of at least 55,000 who have been absolutely slaughtered, and we know there is no end in sight. And the fact is, while the central bank may not be selling, it is facilitating these Israeli war bonds. Right, and we can have an argument in relation to the OPLA, which obviously is the legal service that is available to us, that I imagine has, to me, seems to have the best of legal minds, is intent on ensuring that you don't in any way deviate from anything that could be unconstitutional or unlawful. And they were sufficiently happy to draft this piece of legislation to work alongside Deputy Doherty. And we all know that the central bank needs to be provided with these powers to have national restrictive measures, which I think are absolutely required to ensure that we are not complicit, as is required by the Genocide Convention. But, as some of my colleagues have said, the Minister did not come out and just say, this is unworkable, this is not legal. And again, this is hardly a state that has been too worried about infringement actions being taken against it and legal challenges. It generally has faced up against legal challenges, sometimes when it shouldn't have, when it was against ordinary people trying to ensure that their rights were fulfilled. So we have a case here where we have the Palestinian people who may not exist over the next while. At this point in time, we are facilitating the Israeli government to sell these bonds, and the Minister has not come out and said, this is unworkable, but here's how we're going to deliver. And that is the answer we need from you, Minister. It has to be a case of, we are doing absolutely everything. We all know the issues we have with the Occupied Territories Bill without services. We all know that there's been failure across Europe in relation to delivering on the EU-Israel Association Agreement. I don't know what humanitarian conditions how exactly they were legally put in place on the basis how that is not being infringed at this point in time. But look, we have at this point a very small number of things we can do to ensure that we show absolute solidarity to those who are under genocide, and we make sure Israel is pointed out as the pariah state as it is. This is a small act, but it's a necessary act, and the Irish people demand that it happens.
Thank you very much, Cathaoirleach. I'll be sharing time with my colleague, Deputy George Lawler, 7 and 3, I think. This is an incredible situation that we are in this country and in the Middle East at present. And for the first time 2 weeks ago, and in essence in response to a Labour Party motion and indeed the Sinn Féin bill 2 weeks ago on Israeli bonds, a very significant statement was made by senior government representatives in this House. Finally, a senior government figure in this state has said unequivocally that Israel is carrying out a genocide against the people of Gaza. The Genocide Convention, dare I explain it again, makes it crystal clear that where a genocide is suspected, where it is claimed, there is a moral and a legal obligation for a state to make good on its utterances, to bring that to its logical, practical conclusion, and to take that claim further. It is uncomfortable for government, it's uncomfortable for the leadership of the central bank, and for the citizens of Ireland, and indeed all of us in this House, to comprehend that our financial services regulator, the Irish Central Bank, is, whatever way we interpret it, a critical cog in the wheel funding the Israeli state, which is carrying out a deliberate starvation policy of children and mass murder of citizens in the open prison that is Gaza. Now, the far-right Israeli regime makes no bones about it. The CEO of Israeli Bonds, the organisation that sells these bonds, Danny Neva, has admitted publicly that the resources generated from the sale of these bonds are funding what he calls, and I quote, the military operations in Gaza. Now, the fact that Ireland was saddled with operating the Israeli bonds prospectus is another perverse outworking of Brexit. It's not a responsibility the central bank asked for, I'm assuming, but it's one they, and by extension us, we as Irish citizens, as members of this House, have. Ireland is now the home country for Israeli bonds in terms of prospectus, and the explanations as to why we cannot introduce legislation to change that reality to all too many of us who are desperate to see accountability and an end to the ethnic cleansing seems like mere detail in the face of a bonfire of international laws and norms. It is ironic in the extreme that there is and this is no time for irony, that Israel sees Ireland as a country that's, on the one hand, not fit to host their ambassador, yet they will use conveniently our central bank, our financial regulator, to approve their bond packages for investors who want to invest in the state of Israel. That is frankly perverse. And yes, the central bank is independent in the carrying out of its functions. However, when a senior member of government recognises that the state whose prospectus is approved here is engaged in genocide, then we have a greater responsibility. I and others would argue that all the state agencies have a role here beyond a narrow, technical, Jesuitical interpretation of laws and an obligation to tick a box. I want to read into the record the preamble to the EU prospectus governing this space, preamble section 88, and it states that, and I quote, "The regulator respects the fundamental rights and observes the principles recognised in particular by the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the EU. Therefore, the regulation should be applied in accordance with these rights and principles." End quote. The Charter says the Union is founded on the indivisible universal values of human dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, and it is based on the principles of democracy and the rule of law. This all speaks for itself. That we have not yet imposed any form of sanction on Israel is unconscionable. And I do accept, and we all understand, that Ireland is doing all it can to build coalitions in that regard. And yet we do, as the House knows, have the power in this state to restrict access to financial services. These arguments have been well rehearsed in recent weeks. In other words, there are opportunities to develop and enact legislation to restrict and stop the central bank's role in this. The central bank governor will appear before the Finance Committee today, this afternoon, and he will say that the term for the current prospectus will come to an end in September of this year. Now, regardless of what happens today, the Central Bank of Ireland has a decision to take in the next 3 to 4 months. We can decide to enact emergency legislation, in my view, to stop this now, and indeed challenge the State of Israel to see us in the international courts. Courts, by the way, that they routinely now decide not, in fact, to recognise at all. Let's challenge them to do that. My question now is this, as it moves beyond this motion, in the next 3 to 4 months, will government indicate their view to the central bank and remind them of their legal and moral obligations? What thresholds will government expect them to use? What criteria will they establish and will they apply to a decision that they may have to make to renew the Israeli prospectus as it comes to an end? As a state, we have, at least by the unconscionably low international standards that pertain at the moment, have shown leadership in response to the devastation of Gaza, the genocide being carried out against the Palestinian people. We have been pioneers. Let's continue to be. And let's accept this motion, and as colleagues of the Social Democrats have said earlier on, provide all TDs in this House with the opportunity to vote with their conscience and do the right thing here this evening.
Minister, We can all recite the litany of the dead. We watch nightly the systematic destruction of an entire people. By design, the current government of Israel are ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip, making life impossible to endure there. There can be no doubt that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu are well advanced in implementing a plan to remove the Palestinian people from their historic homeland through bombardment, terror and famine, and ultimately replace them with Israeli settlers. We have witnessed nothing like this in recent world history. A member of the United Nations, in defiance of the basic principles of the UN Charter, which recognises the principle of self-determination of peoples, a core concept in international law, as an obligation on member states. But Israel acts with impunity. It is deaf to any voice of humanity urging it to halt its unconscionable assault on the innocent. Many millions of people around the world look on in horror. I have stood in Wexford town with ordinary people of every political persuasion, simply to bear witness, to stand in solidarity with the suffering people of Palestine. But we stand with a sense of importance. The discussion is that there must be more we can do. We, the Irish people, who have known oppression, who have endured famine, and know well the abuse of power by the dominant over the weak, history places on us an obligation to do all that we can. As you well know, Minister, our recent economic history has also educated our people in the power of the bond market. When Ireland was shut out of the international bond markets after the financial crash, we saw the catastrophic impact on our country. More recently, we witnessed the power of the bond markets to impact the most powerful of political actors. When the markets rejected the budget proposals of British Prime Minister Liz Truss, her government fell. Even Donald Trump was required to change course when the cost of US borrowing shot up after his Liberation Day declarations. I have no illusions that any action by this state will have such dramatic impact. But we must do all that we can. Standing against barbarism in this case will come at a cost, no doubt. Waiting for others to give leadership so that we can more safely follow is morally unacceptable. When the Dunnes Stores workers refused to handle fruit from apartheid South Africa in July 1984, they knew that their actions wouldn't by themselves bring down apartheid. But their actions did bring about the banning of all South African goods by the Irish government in 1987. The first Western government to do so. We need to show the same courage and solidarity with the desperate people of Palestine today. Minister, the people of Ireland demand that we take real action. The people of Ireland demand that we do all in our power. This may be a symbolic signal, but it's a symbolic signal to the world that Ireland will not stand idly by in the face of genocide. Gurmina Magov.
Minister, the Taoiseach gets very annoyed when we use the word complicit, and I think you do too. But what does the word complicit mean? I looked it up again before I came down. It means involved in or knowing something is wrong or unlawful. Now, you know something's wrong, you know it's unlawful, and you have a very big chance to do something about it. Here's a really clear example. The Irish Central Bank is processing Israeli bonds that the Israeli state themselves boast are crucial to the conflict and the war that they're involved in. That's from Isaac Herzog. Now, the ICB governor says they can't stop without a legal basis. There are multiple legal bases. The Genocide Convention, the ICJ ruling, and EU laws themselves that have already been quoted here today. You said it was an appalling tragedy. It is not an appalling tragedy. This is man-made, designed. I would love to be as calm as you are when you speak, but you talk about partners that you're working with. We heard the Taoiseach yesterday talking about some of them. A lot of them are tyrants, by the way, Saudi Arabia and Jordan, that never gives a toss about Palestinians. You also talk about a two-state solution. Do you think there's going to be two states left? The way things are going, Palestine will not exist unless there is action. Now, to hear you parsing and analysing words in the face of a genocide, the ICB took over the role, let's be clear, after Brexit. They needed an EU state to approve these bonds, and Ireland is a linchpin state for the sale of these bonds. It cannot happen without the approval. And to use petty legalities in the face of a genocide, you're putting being compliant with finance laws above the lives of millions of Palestinians. Business as usual. That is complicity. And my heart breaks for the people of Palestine, the fact that they are victims of an absolutely brutal phase of capitalism right now, where colonialism, imperialism is just unleashed. Greta Thunberg summed it up absolutely brilliantly yesterday when she said, why is this happening? Why are governments ignoring this? Racism, but also a system that is so destructive it puts short-term profit and geopolitical interest above the needs of humanity. I salute the March to Gaza and other initiatives by ordinary people. We can't rely on governments like yourself, it's clear.
Minister, I have no doubt that you have feelings of horror like we have and like you expressed. My difficulty is that you're a classic case of cognitive dissonance, because you hold beliefs in your head that are clashing with each other. And the feelings are the same as ours, but your actions are different. And in doing those actions, you seek to rationalise them, which is the classic case of way of resolving cognitive dissonance. And you do that in a way that talks about the independence of the bank, which I'll come back to. And I want to say something that Deputy Coppinger has referred to. You talk about the absolute abhorrence of the death and destruction being visited upon the civilians in Gaza. It's like something out of a Bible, that sentence, in a speech, a carefully crafted speech of 1,279 words. Nothing has been visited on. Israel and the Israeli army are committing genocide. And nowhere in your speech did you say that. Absolutely nowhere. There's nothing being visited on them. Genocide has been perpetuated. The Taoiseach and the Oireachtas have finally said that. In relation to the central bank, of course it's independent, but it's not independent of the law. It's not independent of the central bank law that obliges it to comply with the EU law. And you refer to one article, but you don't balance. And who is advising the governor of the central bank? Is it yourself? Is it some department? What advice has been given? How are the competing articles in the EU being balanced? Can we see how they're being balanced? And what about the staff in the central bank? What is the morale like in the central bank at the moment? I gather it's at an all-time low. I gather the central governor is nowhere to be seen. And in relation to renewing the bonds in September, that's the least we could do. But more importantly, the word complicit absolutely applies, because not alone are we allowing the central bank to function independently when it shouldn't be of the law, but we're also buying the bonds. We are actually buying the war bonds, and you know that. I have the answer. I got a reply. 2-point-something million is the figure from the NTMA and the ISIF investing in war bonds. Directly investing. If that doesn't mean complicit, I don't know what complicit means. But this speech, this carefully crafted speech, is absolutely a working out of cognitive dissonance and does not match the feelings of horror that you've expressed here. Paul, I think you're okay.
Sorry. Thanks. First of all, thanks to the Social Democrats for using their time to allow this joint motion to be debated. There's a lot of obfuscation from the government and an attempt to mislead people in the counter-motion and in the Minister's speech. So it's true that the central bank doesn't sell these bonds. It's true that the central bank doesn't endorse these bonds. It's true that the central bank doesn't oversee these bonds. But the key point, this is true, is that the central bank is facilitating the sale of Israeli bonds across the European Union that are literally paying for the genocide in Gaza. And there's no question that Israel is carrying out a genocide. The Taoiseach and the Taoiseach on the Dáil record have now said it. But they seem to think that they just will say it, get some credit for saying it, and it doesn't have any consequences. It must have legal and moral consequences. You have to do everything in your power to stop a genocide taking place, which means no more hiding behind the technicalities of the EU prospectus regulation, which, by the way, is supposed to be interpreted and applied in accordance with the Charter of Fundamental Rights. But is your argument seriously that a regulation on financial prospectuses should override the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide? You're offended when it's said that you are complicit, but what else can it possibly be? Just yesterday, the Taoiseach just said that anything that can be done to make sure the eyes of the world are fixed on Gaza at a time when the international community is failing to do enough is a good and appropriate thing. It shouldn't require flotillas, it shouldn't require civilians getting on boats and trying to highlight this. It should require the international community growing a backbone here and saying stop, stop the genocide. Take your own advice. Grow a backbone. Do everything you can to stop the genocide. Stop the central bank facilitating the sale of these bonds. But I have no confidence in the so-called international community of Western governments that are complicit, that are funding, that are supporting the genocide. I have a confidence in the international community of ordinary people, those on the streets, trade unions, the mothers, the people on the boats, the people on the march to Gaza, which I'm proud to be participating in.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Social Democrats for bringing forward this motion today. And the Green Party is pleased to co-sign this motion, which seeks to end the central bank's facilitation of the sale of Israeli bonds. And we're deeply concerned that these bonds have, since October of 2023, been marketed explicitly in the context of the ongoing war in Gaza, with statements from the Israeli government describing them as supporting its military efforts. And this situation is taking place in the shadow of dire findings from international legal bodies regarding Israel's actions in Gaza. In January 2024, the International Court of Justice found there was the plausible risk of genocide in Gaza, a determination which, under the Genocide Convention, creates legal obligations for all states to act to prevent genocide and ensure that they do not support or enable it in any way. In July of 2024, the ICJ issued an advisory opinion declaring Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories unlawful and found that its discriminatory policies violated international law, including the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination's ban on racial segregation and apartheid. The central bank has acknowledged that the bond prospectus refers clearly to the war in Gaza and to the intended use of these funds, but stated that it must operate within existing legal constraints. However, I believe that this situation requires careful consideration of Ireland's obligations under international humanitarian law, and particularly under the Genocide Convention. This motion calls for government to urgently assert Ireland's obligations under the Genocide Convention and international humanitarian law, to direct the central bank accordingly, and, if necessary, to introduce legislation to ensure full compliance with these obligations. The Green Party has consistently advocated for humanitarian access, a sustained ceasefire, the release of hostages, and an end to the genocidal actions of the Israeli government. This motion isn't about politics. It's about upholding the standards we set for ourselves as a state and the values of peace, justice and the rule of law.
Deputy Tobin.
Fáilte rih an ruúin seo, ruúin tábhachtach agus gabhaim buíochas don Social Democrats as an ruúin seo chur os córa an dáil inniu. I just want to focus on one particular issue at the moment. It's been reported in the media in the Middle East that the United States and Israel have agreed that the United Nations interim force in Lebanon will cease its operations in southern Lebanon. So it's been reported that the US government has decided not to renew UNIFIL's mandate, and that Israel reportedly did not disagree with them, and that a vote on the mandate in the United Nations Security Council is expected to occur in the coming months. That is a very, very serious issue. Irish troops have been part of the UNIFIL mission for many years. 1978, 30,000 Irish troops have served within that mission, and 47 have lost their lives within that particular mission. At the moment, there are about 340 members of the 125th Infantry Battalion deployed in the Lebanon. So what does this mean? What kind of engagement has the Irish government had with the US government? Very recently, the Taoiseach Simon Harris said by recommitting to the UNIFIL mission, Ireland is sending a clear message that we support peace, we value stability, and we care about the people and communities of southern Lebanon. So Where is that commitment now, if in fact it looks like the US is going to bring that particular mission to an end in southern Lebanon? So maybe the Minister, the government might reply to that very, very serious development within the Middle East. So Israel is dropping bombs on hospitals, on schools and on tents. The IDF is atomizing the bodies of small children with armaments that are funded by Israeli bonds. The Israeli regime is starving people. It is using famine as a weapon of war. It is also trying to humiliate the people of Gaza by providing very restricted food programs and then killing people who seek to feed their families from that food program. I've never seen such gruesome violations of human rights unfold in real time in my life. 54,000 people killed, 70% of those women and children. And I'd never thought that I'd ever witness the international community in cahoots with such a large-scale human rights violation. Many of them in cahoots, but also many silent on the particular issue. Ireland is not silent, I admit that. The Irish government has sent out strong messages, but there is an equivocation here. You're sending out messages, but you're supporting Ursula von der Leyen. You're recognising Palestine, but you're allowing for bonds to be sold for that Israeli war machine. The destruction of the people of Gaza is happening at the moment because it is being facilitated by many people in the international community. The Irish government has facilitated the sale of Israeli war bonds. The Irish government is facilitating the funding of the gruesome horror that is unfolding every day. I would ask the government to stop that facilitation, take a decision, show leadership on this issue and save people's lives. Gur Mágat.
I'd like to focus on one aspect of this motion which I support, and that is to honour Ireland's obligations under the Genocide Convention and to fulfil the duty of the state to use all means likely to have a deterrent effect on those suspected of preparing genocide or reasonably suspected of harbouring specific intent to prevent the genocide and work to prevent the genocide. Basically, Minister, we've had a kind of a two-faced approach. I will acknowledge, as I've said to the Taoiseach before in discussions, that Ireland has played a role. We had the ICJ, for example. We have the Israeli state withdrawing its ambassador, accusing Ireland of being an anti-Semitic country, all because we've signalled our intent. But when it comes to the crunch, what have we done? We've not facilitated the arms embargo bill. We keep trying to dilute and water down the occupied territories bill. Hopefully it's coming in the autumn, but we seem to be just dragging it out, saying that it's not technically possible, oh, this isn't legal, that isn't legal. And the same thing is applying in relation to this legislation. And we had this debate last week and I spoke for 11 minutes on it, but Minister, you're saying that it isn't possible to do what we should be doing in relation to the central bank because of the EU legislation. Why don't we, and I'll ask this question again, why don't we bring it as far as we legally can and leave it up to Europe to then follow suit? We should be doing everything in our power to send the message out about the genocide taking place in Gaza and the atrocities in the West Bank. So let's bring it to the nth degree. Bring it as far as we can, without any excuses. I can't see a reason for excuses here. And if the European Union says it's not legitimate or it doesn't wash, that's up to them. But let's do as much as we can as a country. Thank you.
Thank you, Oireachtas. There's a moment in public life that demands more than ideology. It demands conscience, demands clarity, and above all demands courage. The motion before us, brought by the Social Democrats, seeks to express the opposition to Israel's war efforts by way of economic instrument, by targeting war bonds and financial ties. Now, as a centrist, I approach this motion like this, and other motions like this, with deliberation of mind and a steady hand. I do not believe that foreign policy should be conducted by slogan, nor do I believe that Ireland's voice would be made stronger by shouting the loudest. But silence, too, is a decision. And as we face what we have seen over the past year, silence could be taken as complicity. We have witnessed a catastrophe unfold in Gaza. Over 50,000 lives are lost, many of them children. We have seen cities flattened. We have seen hospitals destroyed, families buried beneath rubble. And they are not just numbers, Minister. They are names, they are stories, and they are loved ones. But let us speak plainly in this House. The atrocities committed on October 7th were barbaric. Hamas carried out a brutal assault on innocent civilians. And any nation has the right to defend itself from terror. But that right is not unlimited. I cannot justify, and we cannot justify, collective punishment. It cannot justify the erasing of a people. Israel has a right to security, but the people of Palestine have a right to dignity. The people of Palestine have a right to self-determination and a right to life. So where does that leave us in this House? If we are to be a republic built on human rights, on the principle of neutrality rooted in peace, not passivity, then we cannot avert our gaze from war crimes alleged. We cannot avert our gaze from the starvation being used as weapons. We cannot divert our gaze of international law being disregarded. That is why I may not endorse every element of this motion's framing, but I do support it in spirit. I support the idea that Ireland should not financially support instruments to fund any destruction. No destruction in Gaza or anywhere else in this world. This is not about choosing a side in an internal conflict. This is about choosing humanity over cruelty. This is about choosing law over chaos and peace over permanent war. If Ireland, small as though it may be, can stand up in this chamber and stand up in the chambers of the world and say we will not fund bombs, but we will fund peace, surely that is the leadership that we need today.
Thank you. We will be supporting this motion, attaining the Central Bank of Ireland's facilitation of Israeli bonds. As a representative of the people of West Cork, which was profoundly impacted by the Great Famine, we have had a personal connection to the suffering of the Gazans today. I'm repeating myself when I say we're here to protect life and dignity without taking sides. Ireland is trusted because we do not serve geopolitical interests. Starvation as a weapon is a breach of international law. Deliberate denial of food and aid is collective punishment. It is a war crime we know from our history during the Great Famine and from the oppression visited on us. The Irish, by others, there is a devastating impact from such actions. Not only does the Irish government have a legal and moral duty to act to avoid complicity in Israel's genocide, if we do not end the central bank's facilitation of Israeli bonds, we are no better than those who profited from shipping produce out of Ireland while the people starved, if our history means anything. Then we must act to alleviate famine where we find it. We see every day the images from this war and the starvation of the very young and the very old. It's time this was stopped. Food is a basic human need, and if we can help, then we must. The government must end the central bank's role in the facilitation of these bonds. There is clear and independent Oireachtas legal advice stating the state has authority to do this, Minister. And it's quite ironic that the Social Democrats are presenting this motion today, given the recent controversy involving one of their own TDs and his sale of shares in Plantier Technologies, a company that supplies technology to the Israeli military. This raises serious ethical concerns to me. They are literally talking out of both sides of their mouth. I would call into question their maturity and ability before advocating for high ethical standards in their motion. Thank you.
Deputy
What everyone has been saying today is completely true. We are witnessing one of the darkest moments in modern history. In Gaza, the population is being bombed, starved, displaced, deprived of the most basic of human rights. When I met a young man who lives in my constituency, whose parents are still in Gaza, I couldn't look him in the eye and say that I am doing everything I can to help him and his family. Ireland cannot be one of those silent countries. Let us speak clearly. Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. This is not a political slogan. It is a conclusion of a respected international legal bodies and the position of government. Human rights organisations and aid workers on the ground. Over 54,000 people have been killed and thousands of others injured. But most of these are men and children. Thousands of families have been completely wiped out. Medical staff, journalists and UN workers. And now, in scenes that are absolutely horrific, because we're seeing them on our phones, hundreds of Palestinians are being shot at while they're trying to get aid. They were not armed. They were not posing any threat. They were just trying to survive, like our ancestors were trying to do. In two separate incidents, Israeli forces opened fire on civilians gathered at aid trucks.
Many of the victims were shot in the back. This is not war. This is absolutely horrific. And I just think we need to do everything we can to be on the right side of history. And the horror continues at every single level. Just days ago, the flotilla carrying food and medicine and baby formula was intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters. Another breach of law. The Israeli state continuously has been breaching law and nothing is being done on them. This is ridiculous. And we've all seen the images, children dying of hunger, infants skeletal from starvation, brought into the crumbling hospitals by the mothers that can do no more. Gaza children are being starved to death in full view. We've said it's a genocide, then why aren't we doing everything we can to stop it? I commend the Irish government for doing what it has done so far, and it has been leading the push to review the EU-Israel trade agreement. But we need to be doing more. And we're blatantly ignoring it. Our voice matters. Our voice has always been a voice for peace. We've done it before with apartheid South Africa. Now let's lead the charge again. We must push the EU to follow the UK's example. In recent days, the UK government sanctioned 2 Israeli ministers, and we need to do it now. They've also sanctioned a leading figure of settlement movement. There are senior members of the Israeli government that we need to be sanctioning, and the main people is the fact that our central bank is facilitating the sale of bonds that are war bonds. This is not about this diplomatic language, it's about technicalities, it's about the decency of us doing the right thing.
I think at the outset, I want to reply to the thousands of emails that I've been receiving and to make it very clear that I or my party or indeed this government do not support the genocide that's taking place in Gaza. We don't support the genocide, we don't support the starvation of Gaza's citizens, we don't support the current actions of either Hamas or Israel. And we believe that those actions, in fact, are undermining the stability of peace in the region and of the ultimate solution of a two-state solution. I do believe Ireland has taken strong action on this. In fact, we have been one of the loudest voices in the global community on the issue of Palestine, and it is difficult sometimes to balance that 2 of the biggest voices criticising this government are on the one hand the Israeli government and on the other hand the Irish opposition, and it's hard to reconcile those 2 things. I'll just take for example the measures we've taken in regards to UNRWA. When Israel and many other countries were seeking to defund and discredit UNRWA, the Irish government were one of the first people to step in and not only to discredit those attempts to undermine UNRWA, but we were also there with money to support their core services and to support Palestinian aid in general. And I also commend our decision to support the ICJ process in evaluating Israel's actions in the occupied territories. The latest issue here is on the sale of Israeli bonds through the central bank. And it certainly is of concern, as the previous speaker said, that we should try and do everything that we can legally do in order to prevent any support. The important word there is legally. The central bank does not issue, sell, trade, list or oversee Israeli bonds. The central bank's role is under EU regulation and is to assess the bonds' perspectives and ensure that it includes all the disclosure requirements in the EU prospectus regulation. That is what the central bank currently does. Now, what's important to note, and what the motion fails to understand, and I take the bona fides of those who are supporting the motion, but I think everybody in this House accepts that the central bank is independent in its functions of government. If it were not to be independent in its functions, the Minister for Finance would be setting the interest rates of every mortgage in the country. We cannot have a situation where the government can direct the central bank. It is independent. It is a cornerstone of the way our system works. As I say, the bank doesn't issue, sell or oversee the bonds, and there is strong EU regulation. The central bank's own press release
is very clear in what it can and what it can't do. However, the central bank does have a contract to issue this prospectus. And the central bank is an institution which regards its own reputation as important. And while the central bank has very limited grounds in which it could decline the prospectus when that comes due, they should use every element within their own independence in order to ensure that that prospectus that is only approved because of the very basic financial regulations that they can operate within. If there is any grounds that they, as an independent body, can decline the prospectus, then it's my belief that they should. But that is not the same thing as this House or this government instructing an independent body to do that. I think in addition to that, I think we have all in this House called for an immediate ceasefire. We've all called for the release of hostages. But there's a broader call which we have to make to our own European partners. Because while there is a huge strength of feeling in this House in regards to the issue of Palestine, I think many of us also are left. I think we cannot understand why many of our European partners are not taking the same position when you see the pictures every night. And I know that that is in part because of the historical relationship and the historical facts that have taken place on the continent over the last 100 years. But we cannot allow what has happened in the past to restrict our ability to prevent a genocide taking place. And it is my view that other European Union countries need to come on board with Ireland, with Spain, with our other partners, and we need to take the far bigger and far greater sanction, which is to review the EU-Israel trade agreement, which we have voted for, took too long, and we also need to introduce European sanctions against Israel, as we did with Russia. The impact of European sanctions against Israel would be far more effective than the passing of the Occupied Territories Bill, which we are committed to doing, than anything we do here in relation to bonds. In order to review, cease or end the EU-Israel trade deal, it would be one of the largest sanctions that we could take against Israel. And I want to say in the last minute that I have, many people, including this week when I was on national television, said that the government was afraid to take these actions because somehow the capitalist system, our relationship with America, business and so on, was somehow acting as a chilling effect on us taking these steps. I can't reconcile that argument with the steps that Ireland has taken, because I know from people who I've spoken to in the United States, they don't understand why Ireland is taking these decisions. That impression that Ireland is already a strong supporter of the Palestinian people and a strong supporter of preventing what's happening there, that is already known around the world. So the argument doesn't stack up that we're afraid to take certain decisions because it might affect business. Business will never impact the morals of this government or any other government, I would hope, in this state. It is not the reason why we're taking actions. And the opposition who say that we are not supporting this, by not supporting this motion, we're supporting genocide, I would say shame on any member that says that. Shame on any member that says that I'm supporting genocide because I can't vote for a motion which is not legally sound.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. I'd like to thank all deputies who have spoken so passionately in this debate this morning about the horrific, inhumane situation in Gaza. Being in government is about doing everything in our power to address issues facing society, but it's about doing it within the confines of international law so that real progress can be made. There may be difference of opinion on our approach, but I do not doubt for a moment the sincerity of this motion. But what has been asked is to bring in measures where there is a material risk that they are in conflict with an EU treaty. That is what our legal advice states, and the practical reality is that this motion would be counterproductive to achieving tangible impacts. I addressed it all today, like all previous speakers, fully aware of and deeply affected by the hardship and the suffering of the Palestinian people. I fiercely denounce the ongoing military operations by the Israeli Defence Forces in Gaza. This has inflicted more misery and hunger on the people of Gaza. Israel's continued expansion of its military operation in Gaza and its announced establishment of a sustained presence are extremely worrying and will further deepen an already terrible situation. The Government has consistently condemned any arrangement for humanitarian assistance that does not ensure access for the entire population. Israel's decision to take control of the distribution of humanitarian aid through private contractors has been described by the UN as unacceptable and designed to further control and restrict supplies. The term unacceptable is an understatement of the time. Recent weeks has seen a meagre amount of aid being permitted to enter Gaza, and this is completely out of proportion with the scale of humanitarian aid, which continues to grow day by day. As previous speaker said, starvation is being used as a weapon of war, and the actions of Israel is genocide. I hold a deep respect for the principles at the heart of the opposition's motion, and the Government shares in much of these, such as the collective commitment to human rights and international law. These are principles I believe all members of the House share. As Minister Donoghue outlined previously, the Government and the Social Democrats' motions share more common ground than differences when it comes to the issues in Gaza. However, it is our belief that our counter-motion is the correct motion for the House to endorse. It sets out the work the Government has done today, but more importantly, the work that we will continue to do to try and help and assist to bring about a peaceful settlement in Palestine. I feel it's important when this House speaks that we do so with a unified voice on this issue. I think our voice is stronger unified on the international stage. Ireland has been one of the loudest voices internationally, both bilaterally and multilaterally, repeatedly calling on Israel to comply with international law, stressing the universal applicability of international law, including international humanitarian law. Ireland will continue to uphold these principles as we double down our commitment to defending and strengthening a stable and secure international environment based on the respect for international law. Since the onset of this conflict, Ireland has sought to support humanitarian responses wherever we can. We have provided over 88 million in support to the people of Palestine, which includes 58 million for UNRWA since 2023 to support programmes in Gaza. The Government is also pushing ahead with legislation to prohibit imports from illegal settlements in the occupied territories in accordance with the commitment in the programme for government. What is needed now more than ever is an urgency on the international stage, a unified approach with the singular goal of ending disproportionate suffering. And while we hold Israel to account in this House, we must also voice our unreserved condemnation of the role of Hamas in forcing the suffering on the people, despite excessive and disproportionate means of the retaliation which the Israeli state has embarked on. We have also condemned the taking of hostages, which is totally unacceptable. And I repeat again today, Ireland's call for the immediate and unconditional release of all remaining hostages. It is clear that Hamas has brought only death, destruction and the suffering of both their own people and Israel. The Government acknowledges through the counter-motion that we are united in our disgust of the United Nations reported death of 54,600 people killed in Gaza since October 2023, over 23,000 of whom are women and children. Additionally, we are gravely concerned at the latest assessment by the IPC Global Hunger Monitor that the entire population of Gaza is facing insecurity, with 500,000 people facing starvation. As this House is aware, Ireland is committed advocate of multilateral action. Ireland implements EU and UN sanctions. When we address complex international issues, it is addressed that these measures are introduced must be negotiated and agreed and introduced at EU and UN level for them to have real credibility and real impact. The collective power of the UN is best placed to promote the objectives of the bloc's common foreign and security policy and to bring about a change in the policy of behaviour of the subject of the measure. Any attempt to act unilaterally could undermine the unified approach that we are beginning to see form at EU level. We cannot seek to uphold international law by breaking EU law. We cannot seek to. Ireland has a strong voice in Europe on this matter, and we have galvanised support among several member states thanks to our leadership and our action. And more, we need support of further member states. A unified approach towards the situation in Gaza is the most viable approach. Just as we have a unified approach towards Russia's aggression and destruction in Ukraine, Europe must have the same view and response when it comes to Israeli action in Gaza. Ireland, and indeed the world, has been found wanting in this area when it comes to the unified approach. This is largely due to the historical reasons of what has been inflicted on the Jewish people in the past, but I feel that is totally wrong and no justification for the lack of action on behalf of some member states. Not one deputy or minister in this House is more horrified than another about the situation in Gaza. I don't believe motions like this from the opposition, while well-meaning, can help sow division when solidarity is needed more than ever in this House. The work of our diplomats in Europe and the United Nations is valued and delicate. We must ensure that their work is allowed to progress unobstructed and that Ireland continues to build a consensus which can have a lasting impact. The opposition will measure, some in the opposition will measure the success of this motion in media clippings and social media posts tomorrow. Let me be very clear that the government measures success in this regard very differently, and our work will continue with the utmost resolve to work towards what needs to be done. We have been building support with international leaders consistently, adding signatures and condemning Israeli action, building alignments towards a unified approach, and I fully accept that is not happening near fast enough in comparison to what is happening on the ground in Gaza. But our commitment and our belief in moving the dial is steadfast. Ireland must prioritise coordinated action through mechanisms of the EU and the UN to ensure that any measures taken are robust and internationally respected. Sanctions are stronger and more effective when done at unilateral level. Ireland continues to support the review of the EU-Israel Association Agreement and welcomed the EU decision last month. We were one of the first two to call for that back in February 2024. We intervened in South Africa's International Court of Justice case against Israel under the Genocide Convention, and we recognise Palestine as a sovereign and independent state. As Minister Dunham has already outlined, but I feel it must be reiterated again, the role of the central bank. The role of the central bank has been misrepresented by some in opposition who are sowing division, and some are using this, unfortunately, this appalling human suffering for political gain here domestically. We should be clear of what the role of the central bank is. It is an independent, non-political financial regulator that works under the auspices of law, and in this particular case, with regards to the approval of the Israeli perspective documentation, EU law. To be clear to the House, the central bank does not issue, sell, trade, list or overseas Israeli bonds. Under the EU perspective regulation, a perspective must be created, approved and published when securities are to be offered to the public or admitted to trading on a regulated market in the EU. In the case of Israel, a non-EU trade country, they chose the Irish Central Bank to approve their perspective post-Brexit, and the bank is obliged under the EU law to approve it once it is satisfied that it meets the conditions laid out by the regulations. These conditions concern completeness, consistency, comprehensibility and legality. The central bank is not endorsing these bonds. The proposed motion would seek to initiate legislation to stop the central bank from fulfilling its obligation under EU law, which the government has previously been advised would breach our obligation as a member of the European Union and leave the state open to legal proceedings. I reiterate again, this would ultimately be a case of breaking one law to enforce another law, and we don't believe it would work. To conclude, I firmly believe that when the House speaks, we should do so as a unified voice. Ireland has led in this issue and we have brought others along. As I said, in February 2024, we were only 2 countries who wrote or signed a formal letter seeking a review of the EU-Israeli Association. Now the majority of Europe is singing on the same hymn sheet, and we need to ensure that we have a fully unified approach. Ireland is using all the tools it has at its disposal, political, legal, diplomatic and humanitarian, in response to this dreadful conflict. It is not in the interest of the innocent people of Gaza to take unilateral action by disregarding EU law to change a domestic law that would ultimately not achieve its goals of stopping the approval of Israeli bonds in the EU. It's for these reasons that the Government moves the counter motion.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy Hearn.
This motion gives the Irish Government the opportunity to fulfil its moral, its ethical, its legal and democratic obligations to act to prevent the genocide that is being committed against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Israel is pursuing a campaign of collective punishment against the Palestinian people, destroying entire cities and forced displacement camps where people have nowhere else to go. It is a war crime, and that war crime is being committed and undertaken, funded through the Irish Central Bank. The most upsetting, abhorrent war crime that is being committed is the collective punishment of children. According to UNICEF, more than 15,000 children in Gaza have been killed, more than 34,000 injured, and nearly 1 million displaced. Gaza has become the graveyard of our collective humanity with what is being done in terms of the children, the mass murder of them, of their families, of their communities, of the entire Palestinian people. Now, the government is claiming that Ireland is a leader internationally on Palestine. And indeed it is true that in calling out Israel for its war crimes and genocide, you have done more than other countries. But it is very clear there is more you could be doing. And in fact, you are in one of the most powerful places in the world to do more, because the Irish people have shown they want you to do more. The Irish people themselves are leaders on a global scale. They organise protests every other day in towns, in villages, in cities. On bridges we see them, we join them. Day after day, thousands of Irish people stand in solidarity and plead with you to do more. Opinion polls show that overwhelmingly the Irish government wants to lead internationally in sanctioning Israel. So take the mandate you have been given from the Irish people. Be courageous and do everything, and I mean everything you can do to sanction Israel. Stop the central bank facilitating the sale of Israeli war bonds. You must do it immediately. As I said, there is a moral, there is an ethical, there is a legal and a democratic obligation on you to intervene and stop the Irish state facilitating bonds, these war bonds. Step up, take the consequences from the EU. I'll repeat it again, take the consequences. You can take a lead. Yes, it will upset some European partners. Yes, it requires taking action that goes beyond the normal course of business. But this is genocide. It is being committed by the state and government of Israel. They are acting unilaterally to wipe out the Palestinian people, and our central bank is facilitating that. Condemning the crimes means nothing if we're funding them. This government needs to act. Support this motion. It's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Jane Cummins.
I'm here today with a very heavy heart, and I have an unwavering sense of duty not only to this House but to the generations who will read about what's happening right now in the future. Someday, maybe in 20 years or 30 years, our school children across Ireland will open their history books and they will come upon a chapter saying Palestine. And they will read about the tens of thousands of people killed, about the children pulled from the rubble and the people starved under blockade.
Deputy Cummins, I am very sorry, but we have to conclude the debate for 12 o'clock and I have to put the question. So I'd ask you to conclude.
It's not right.
Thank you.
It's not right. It's not right. Several times other people went over their speaking time.
We have a 12 o'clock.
Several times.
I appreciate that. Deputy, we have a 12 o'clock deadline. I'm afraid I don't make the rules. The rule is 12 o'clock for leaders' questions. Well, pardon? Well, well, I appreciate then that we will continue, but it means this is what happens when people go over their time. Deputy Cummins. Thank you. With the consent of all members, yes.
Thank you. As I was saying, the hospitals, homes and humanity itself reduced to dust. And they will read about a world that watched, and they will ask us, they will ask every one of us, what did you do? And what did Ireland do? And I ask every deputy here, what will you say?
As a mother of 4, I really struggle to watch the TV. I struggle to see those children in cloths who are dead, those babies. And I saw a mother in the paper today. I actually have to say I thought I might break down crying here today. I'm not going to, because the look on her face, it's not only the death of her child, but it's the death of humanity. And be under no illusion, what's happening in Gaza can happen here. It can happen in this country. And we will be pleading with the international community to please, God, do something for us. Do anything. They'll be despairing. We'll be despairing. We will be desperate. And the death will continue like it is there. And this motion isn't symbolic. It's very clear. And it's not that we don't want it in our money being used for this. We don't want the silence to continue. To facilitate Israeli bonds is to invest quite literally in the machinery of occupation, apartheid and annihilation. And we have a choice. The people of Gaza do not. So I'm asking, please, can every deputy vote with their conscience this evening and support this motion?
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan.
I want to thank everybody who's contributed to this cross-party motion and who's spoken today. Let's be very clear about this. That the Minister and the Government are hiding behind technicalities and standard arguments that are wheeled out to justify inaction. The Government could act on this if they want to. The Central Bank is independent, that is correct. But as Deputy Catherine Connolly has pointed out, they are not independent of the law. And we, as elected members, elected by the people of Dáil Éireann, we have a role and a mandate to enact legislation and enact emergency legislation in this regard. We have a responsibility to do so. As my colleague, Deputy Sinead Gibney, pointed out, the Central Bank themselves have said that a legal basis for refusal of approval of the prospectus for these bonds would be national restrictive measures. And of course, as the Dáil, we could do that. The Government have said they won't bring forward emergency legislation because it will be open to legal challenge. That is meaningless language to use. Every piece of legislation brought through this Dáil is, of course, open to legal challenge. If that was the threshold, this Government would never enact any legislation whatsoever. We have clear advice, independent advice from the Office of the Parliamentary Legal Advisor that measures on this would be in compliance with Irish law, EU law and international law. It's utterly wrong for the whip to be used this evening on backbench government TDs in this. They should be given a free vote to vote with their conscience on this. And every TD this evening has a responsibility to do so. We've had at least 54,000 people killed, probably many more, in Gaza, and we need action on this now. How much longer is it going to take for us to have action on this? What would it take for the government to take action on this? These bonds are being used to help fund genocide, to help fund bombs landing on the heads of people in Gaza. So we need every TD in this Dáil to vote this evening for this emergency legislation, to enact emergency legislation to stop the facilitation of the sale of these bonds.
Thank you, Deputy O'Callaghan.